All right, Rabbi, say good morning. Good morning. Let us begin. Begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning's share. To thank our annual Talmud Torah sponsor, Tosun Shvach Haveritz Yisrael, for dedicating Ovishum Joshos this year as his chus for Besoros Tovos Am Yisrael. Our Talmud Torah sponsor for the month of Elul, Habadin Latova Ben Goldberg, for Aliyah and the Shemus of his parents, Avram Ben Asher Pinchas, Vega Rezel Bas Zelig, and in the hopes that the tefillos of our entire kilo, all of Klal Yisrael, will be answered in Meretz Hashem this holy month. Shmuel Silber, Le'ui Nishmas David Flum's father, Rabbi Ari Flum, Harav Yitzchak Aryeh Ben Achav Rabbi Yaakov Zichron Levracha. And as always, we dedicate our learning in the schos of our precious hostages, Mechalish Baruch Meretz Hashem, bring them home, B'Shalom and B'Karov. The merit of our holy soldiers may they be successful. B'chol ma'asei yedehem. But say with that, let us begin. Mazel tov upon reaching the final daf of Maseches Horayos and Seder Nezikin. Today's daf is Yud Dalid, but we are picking up on Yud Gimel Amud Aleph 13a. We're picking up Emosai, which is 2, 4, 6, 8 lines up from the bottom at the 2 dots. Remember again, the Mishnah introduced us to the concept of these hierarchies, multiple hierarchies within Klal Yisrael. So the Mishnah, for example, said that a Kohen comes before a Levi becomes before Yisrael, Yisrael before a Mamzer, so on and so forth. So the Gemara says, when is all of this true? When they're all of equal footing. But for example, if let's say one of them is a Talmud Chacham comes first. So for example, if you have a Mamzer Talmud Chacham and a Kohen, the Mamzer Talmud Chacham takes precedence over the Kohen. So the Gemara says, where do I know this from? Such beautiful Gemara. Ultimately, the Gemara says such a beautiful, beautiful pasuk. The pasuk says it is more precious than gems. So what is this referring to? Supposed to say this pasuk in Mishlei is referring to Torah. Torah itself is more precious than even the most valuable jewels. Mikoin Gadol, what does this mean? A Talmud Chacham is more precious. Mikoin Gadol shenichnas lifnai v'lifnim. Even that, right, Talmud Chacham is more precious. Yikarihi, Torah is more precious. Mipninim, a little bit of a play on words, from the Kohen Gadol who enters into the Holy of Holies on Yom Kippur. As we discussed yesterday, I will say, the difference is that a Talmud Chacham represents what you make of yourself, versus these other statuses as a Kohen, a Levi, even a Yisrael. These, at least initially, are statuses which are conferred upon you. Earned status is greater than holier status. Earned status is greater than conferred status. Incredible. Let's go back there. Really, an emancipated slave ultimately again should take precedence over a ger. Why? Because an emancipated slave grew up within a Jewish home, and therefore halacha l'maaseh grew up, so to speak, in a context, in a situation. Welcome back to Ramel Pashino. Wow. Baruch haba. Such a supposed to finish. It's Maseches Horayos with you. Incredible. Baruch haba. Okay, so the Gemara, I thought this early in the morning I was seeing things, and then Baruch Hashem. Incredible. It's funny that I have to do it right. But even if I have to see things, so good to see you. Baruch Hashem. So the Gemara says as follows. So I would have thought that a Neved Meshuchar takes precedence over a ger. Why? Because at the end of the day, an Neved Meshuchar grew up, so to speak, in a Jewish home, versus a ger which did not. The Gemara says, Elo zeh haya bichlal ara v'zeh lo haya bichlal ara. The difference is that an Eved descends from a cursed lineage. Remember again, Evadim come from Canaan, and Canaan was cursed. Shalu tell me this, Rabbi Tzadok. Me'ma hakol ratzin lisa giores, ve'ein hakol ratzin lisa mishuchreres. So it's a very interesting shayla. The students asked Rabbi Tzadok, why is it that everyone literally means runs? 4 lines up from the bottom, 13a. So the Gemara says, why is it that people run? Now, run means that people are agreeable or amenable to marry a giores, but people don't necessarily want to marry an emancipated maidservant. What's the reason for that? Amar lahem, very simple. Zu haisa bichlal arar, v'zu lo haisa bichlal arar. Once again, a servant was in the context of arar, of cursed, but a giores was not. The possibilities, zu haisa becheskas shamar, v'zu lo haisa becheskas shamar. A giores, Rashi points out over here, presumably knows that one day she's going to want to convert. Therefore, she's careful, ultimately, again, with her own personalistic kedusha. She's moral, she's not promiscuous, but a shifcha never knows if she's going to be emancipated, and therefore, Allah unfortunately behaves immorally. makir eskono, v'chatul eno makir eskono. This is fascinating. Why is it that a dog knows its master, has an allegiance to its master, but yet a cat does not? What's the pshat? So the Gemara says, Amar lahem, Uma ha'ochal mima she'achbar ochal, mishkach ha'ochal akbar atzmo alachas kama v'kama. So says, we're going to see in Amud Beis, there's a whole list of items that if you eat them cause forgetfulness. Amongst them, a mouse. If you eat from something that a mouse eats, that causes you to forget. So the Gemara says, if you eat a cat, cats eat mice. Therefore, by definition, a cat doesn't remember its owner because, again, it consumes a mouse. Interesting idea. Okay, why mice create forgetfulness? We'll see in just a moment. Why is it that no one likes mice? Right? Why does no one like mice? And everyone's always trying to kill the mouse, catch the mouse, all these different kinds of things. So the Gemara says, because mice are bad. They have bad midos. Suran ra means that inherently, a mouse exhibits negative behavior. How so? The Gemara says, Rava Amar, Maihi, Rava Amar, Afilu Glimi Gaitzi. It's one thing I will say, because mice don't just eat through food, right? Don't just consume food, but rather they'll gnaw through everything. They'll even gnaw through clothing. Now, what benefit does a mouse have when it gnaws through clothing? The answer is none. So what the Gemara is pointing out over here is that a mouse is just destructive in nature, even though there's no benefit. Amud Beis, 13b, the Gemara says, Papa Amar, Afilu Shufsa Mari Gaitzi. Sometimes they'll even chew through the handle of a shovel. Now, again, you'll ask yourself, what benefit does the mouse get when it chews through the mouth of the handle of the shovel? The answer is nothing, but it still does it. That destructive nature of a mouse is something that is considered to be so negative, and therefore, Allah Lamaisa, inherently, man doesn't like mice. Incredible. So we'll say, Tan Rabbanan. Now we'll say, I want to also point out, I have to ask you, Mechila, now, I'm not going to do justice to a lot of these Gemaras, because there's so much profundity, there's so much meaning in all of this. We'll get to the end. If we have time, in Mir Hashem, there's a couple of sections I want to go back to, but we're gonna make sure that we finish the daf today. There are 5 things which cause a person to forget their learning. So again, I will say, if one eats from something that a mouse ate, so in other words, let's say a mouse nibbled on a loaf of bread. If you then eat from that causes forgetfulness. If you eat from something that a cat ate, now again, it's not because of the cat, but rather why is it? Because cats eat mice, so therefore again, it's the same type of thing. If one eats the heart of an animal, which I will say, that one you could understand, because you consider the heart is the very life source. So to ingest the very life source of animalistic life, by definition, dulls and blunts your humanity, which causes you to forget your Torah. One who eats too many olives. If you drink bath water, if you drink leftover bath water, seems like a bad idea on many levels, right? But Lamaisa causes forgetfulness as well. This is fascinating. If you wash your feet one on top of the other. So just the imagery that remember, we're talking about, let's say somebody has like a bucket of water and you're washing your feet. So if you put one foot on top of the other and you wash it, that causes forgetfulness. So I'll say, just think about that imagery for just a moment. If your feet are one on top of the other, what does that show? Usually you can't walk like that. You're immobile. When do you forget your learning? When ultimately, again, you don't move yourself forward. If one foot is on top of the other, you can't walk. If you can't walk, you can't move, you can't advance. Such a person, unfortunately, loses their Torah. So too, someone who puts his clothing underneath his head. Fold up, put it up underneath your head. I think it's the same misod. That ultimately, again, if you put your clothing underneath your head, what is that? If you don't have your clothing, then what? Then you can't go ahead and get out into the world and accomplish things. So by definition, if you can't get out and accomplish, you're going to forget your Torah. Spirituality is only retained if it's a process that is constantly moving forward. But if it remains in place by definition, it regresses. You wash one foot on top of the other, you're not moving forward. You're not wearing your clothing, it's tucked underneath your pillow, you're not moving forward. If you're not moving forward, by definition, you are regressing and forgetting. Incredible. There are 5 things which can restore your learning, or like jog your memory, restore your learning. What are they? Number 1, pas pachman, a bread baked over coals. The coals themselves are apparently beneficial for memory. If you eat a roasted egg without salt, olive oil. Olive oil, we both say it's interesting, right? Olives cause forgetfulness. Olive oil apparently is good for memory. And we'll say a person who regularly drinks wine and smells nice things, that's good for memory. Incredible. And if you drink the leftover water from baking bread, from making dough. Others say also if you dip your finger in salt and you eat the salt. So person who drinks, right, who ingests olive oil is good for memory. The same way that consumption of olives could cause, too much consumption of olives could cause you to forget your learning, even from 70 years. So too again, olive oil could cause you to recall your learning, even that you forgot, or could cause you to retain your learning for 70 years. Next, we'll say again, like I said, so there's a beautiful, just you can make a note, there's a beautiful marsha on this olive oil piece. If we have time, we'll come back to it. And we'll say again, if a person regularly drinks wine and goes ahead and besamim and smells nice things, that's good for memory. Wine and nice smells, nice scents make you wise. Incredible. If you dip your finger into Rish Lakish says it's 1 finger into salt. So the Gemara says, Kitanai, Rabbi Huda Omer Achos v'lo Shtayim. Rabbi Huda says 1 finger and not 2 fingers. Rabbi Yossi Omer Shtayim v'lo Shalosh. Rabbi Yossi says no, 2 fingers and not 3 fingers. V'simanech kmitza. All right, the way Tamara will say this, Machlokes is ultimately again kmitza. The way the Kohen does his mincha. Asar dvarim kashem lalimud. There are 10 things. There are 10 things. We'll say that make it difficult. Now, what kashem limud means, makes it difficult to learn, but really means ultimately difficulty for retention. Difficulty for learning and retention. Number 1, ha'over tachas ha'afsar ha'gamal. If one walks underneath the reins, or like the halter of a camel, v'kol shekein tachas gamal atzmo. Or if one walks underneath the camel itself, that's ultimately, again, makes it difficult for learning. Va'over ben shnei gemalim, or you walk between 2 camels. Va'over ben shtei nashim, or if a man walks between 2 women. Va'isha ha'overes ben shnei anashim, or if a woman walks between 2 men. These are all items ultimately, again, that make it difficult to learn and to retain your learning. Va'over mitachas reach ra'ash shel nevela, or if a person goes ahead and goes by the putrid smell of an animal carcass. Va'over tachas hagesher shelo avru tachtav mayim mem yom, or one walks underneath a bridge there where it hasn't rained for 40 days. Va'ocha pas shelo bishal kol tzarcha, or if you eat bread that is not fully baked. Va'ocha basar mizuama listron, and one who goes ahead and eats from the stirring spoon of a pot, right? That's the pot that like has all like the schmaltz on it from the cooked dish. If one drinks from a stream which runs through a cemetery, or one goes ahead and looks at the face of the dead. They both say, there's a very interesting halacha that we have, that once a person passes away, we're supposed to cover the face. Supposed to immediately cover the face. Close the mouth, close the eyes, and cover the face. One is not supposed to look at the face of the dead. This is fascinating. Or some say reading the inscriptions on a headstone, on a gravestone, causes a person ultimately, again, to forget their learning. Now, I both say those last 2 are very interesting. First of all, reading an inscription on a headstone, that's what it's there for, right? In other words, what else is to do with it? So we'll say, I think perhaps just spending a moment on those last 2, Mistaka b'fnei hameis represents a person who to a certain degree is rooted in the past. Part of the avodah, we'll say, it's fascinating, that if you look at Hilchos Avelos, part of what we do in Avelos is we move forward. There's a period of time where you are rooted in the loss, that's Shiva, and then everything else ultimately, again, is about propelling the Avel forward. The Avel still has Hilchos Avelos, but those Hilchos Avelos represent the duty that the Avel has to the neshama of his loved one. People make a mistake. They think that those Avelos behaviors are there to hold the Avel back. Not at all. It's there to propel the Avel forward in a particular type of avoda of taking care of the neshama of their loved one and not to get distracted by other things. But Hamistakel B'fnei Hames represents to a certain degree being focused on the loss which represents the past. Reading the headstone, I don't think it means like reading it the first time. I think it's talking about reading it over and over and over. At a certain point in time, right? Like we always say, the most important words in all of Shas, Ma'ida Hava Hava, what was, and a person needs to move forward. You know, the Gemara has an incredible statement. The Gemara says, Gzeirahi shames nishtachach min alev. Kadosh Baruch Hu made a gzeira that the dead are ultimately forgotten. Now, what does that mean? Anyone who's ever suffered loss knows the dead are never forgotten. What it means is that Kadosh Baruch Hu programmed us with the ability to compartmentalize. When loss is fresh, it lives on the frontal lobe, and it's everywhere all the time. As we move ourselves forward, we're able to compartmentalize. Move ourselves. Someone who's mistakel b'fnei hameis, right, looking at the mace, always reading the tombstone, is living too much in the past. If you live too much in the past, ultimately, can't move yourself forward. Can't move yourself forward, you can't learn, and you can't retain what you learn. Incredible. Tana Rabban Abba say first line. First line. First line. Kishanasi nichnas. Now again, Abba say this is fascinating. When the nasi walks into the base medrash, Kala am omdin. Everybody has to stand up. And they can't sit down until the Nasi says, you can sit. Kisha Abezin nichnas, when the Abezin walks in, Osim lo shura achas mikan, shura achas mikan, Acheshim mikomo, they make two lines for him, and ultimately again remain standing until he gets to his place. Kisha chacham nichnas, Atam chacham walks in, Echad omin ve'echad yoshev Acheshim mikomo. Once he enters into your Dalar Amos, you stand up. But once it's out of your Dalar Amos, you could sit down. So three different forms of kavod for the Nasi, Av Beis Din, and a regular Talmid Chacham. B'nei Chachamim v'Talmidei Chachamim. Shmuel says, listen to this. The sons of Chachamim and general Talmidei Chachamim, Bizman Shabbat Tzrichim Lahem, when they serve a public need, Mafsin al Rashi Ha'am. Ultimately, again, they're literally translated, they're allowed to walk on the heads of people. Now, what does that mean? I was saying the Beis Medrash, the Talmidim were often sitting on the floor. So if you walked into the Beis Medrash after everyone was seated, it looked like you were doing what? Stepping on the heads of the people. So the Gemara says the sons of Chachamim and Talmidei Chachamim who serve the community are permitted to enter into the Beis Medrash even after everyone else is seated, even though it looks like a shtickle disrespectful that they're walking over everyone. Yatz l'tzarech. So we'll say, if let's say again the Talmid Chacham is inside the Beis Medrash, and then he has to leave to relieve himself. What's ta'alacha? He could come back in and go back to his place. If there are sons of Talmidei Chachamim whose father has a leadership position in the community, when they have das to understand their father's shir, they come in and they sit in front of their father, and their back is to the rest of the people. When the sons themselves do not have the das to understand what's happening over here, ultimately, again, so in that case, they sit behind their father, facing the people. They will say, by the way, you begin to see something very interesting. Even outside of the Beis Medrash, even let's say again, Beis Medrash means like in a party or at a wedding, we give kavod to the children of Talmidei Chachamim, just like we give Talmidei Chachamim kavod. I will say it's interesting to note over here. If you notice, by the way, again, we don't have time to delve into a lot of these things, but you'll notice that how fascinating is there are two different types of Talmidei Chachamim. There's a Talmid Chacham and there's a Talmid Chacham who has a position of leadership in the community. The one who has a position of leadership in the community is given greater kavod than just a Stam Talmid Chacham. And the Musar Haskell, the Yesod, is so profound. Because again, when you serve the community, that elevates your status. When you give, and when you do for the collective, you become greater. We often think that the metric to personalistic greatness is how much you do for yourself. That's part of it. You have to work on yourself. But real greatness doesn't come from what you do for yourself. Real greatness comes from your willingness and ability and dedication to serve your community, to do and to be there for others. Incredible. Armar, Slichas is 625? 25, good, okay. But it's Armar, so we said before, Talmid Chacham leaves the base medrash to take care of his bodily needs. He could come back, he could walk back in. Amr Papa, Amr El Liktanim. The Papa says only for urination, because again, that could happen that he just couldn't help himself. Avaligdolim, low. But I will say, let's say he went out to defecate, then you can't come back in and walk over the Talmid Chacham. Why not? The Gemara says, because we'll say the Gemara assumes over here that for defecation, a person should regulate their body a little bit more. In other words, take care of your needs before you go into the base medrash. Person should always condition themselves, we'll say, to defecate in the morning and in the evening so they don't have to go ahead and distance it. What does this mean? Didn't have indoor plumbing, so you had to go relieve yourself outside. If you defecate during the day, you have to find like some far off space because you can't do that in front of other people, right? So therefore, the best thing to do is kind of regulate your body that you could defecate early in the morning before anyone else is around. So you can go out right onto the backyard, right? Or late at night, or later at night. No one else is around, also you don't have to go too far. So therefore, the Gemara sees it as negligence if the Talmid Chacham came into the base medrash and then has to leave to defecate. You should be able to control that a little bit better. The Gemara says, however, but today people are weaker. People are weaker in general. People don't have the same constitution, and therefore, again, even to defecate, if the Talmid Chacham left, he could come back in. Rabbi Lazar, Rabbi Tzadok, Amr Afa Beis Hamishta Osam Snifin. So children of Talmid Chacham are given covered even in celebration. Amr Rabbi Chaya Bi B'Pnei Avim. This is only true during the lifetime of their father and in the presence of their father. Amr Rabbi Yochanan, B'Meir Rabbi Shimon. So we'll say, okay, get ready for this story. Rabbi Yochanan said as follows: B'Meir Rabbi Shimon Mishnah Zu. We'll say this Mishnah that we learned, which Mishnah? That there are different forms of kavod given to the Nasi, Av Beis Din, and Talmidei Chachamim. That Mishnah was taught during the days of Rabbi Shmuel Silber. Rabbi Shmuel Silber was the Nasi. He was the Nasi. Because the Gemara says, Rabbi Shmuel Silber Nasi, Rabbi Meir Chacham, Rabbi Nassan Av Beis Din. Okay, so these three people, Rabbi Shmuel Silber was the Nasi, Rabbi Nassan was the Av Beis Din, and Rabbi Meir was the ranking Talmid Chacham. Now, now watch this. Ki Rabbi Shmuel Silber Hasam, Havekami Kuli Al Mikamei. Ki Aili Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Nassan, Havekami Kuli Al Mikamayu. So Rabbi Shmuel walked into the base medrash, everyone stood up. But they did the same thing when Rabbi Nassan and Rabbi Meir walked in as well. So Rabbi Shmuel says it doesn't make sense. Rabbi Shmuel lo baileme havi hakera ben delay lidido. Shmuel says it is important to create a distinction between the honor given to me. Now he wasn't saying to me. What was he saying? What was he saying? To the office. It is important that there is a distinction to the honor given to the Nasi versus the Av Beis Din versus Talmid Chacham. I both say it is important to understand that this is not ego. This is not ego. This is about preservation of authority. For the Nasi to have authority, the office has to be looked at. So people are kind of just grouping rabbis. Oh, the rabbis, right? It's the rabbis, right? So if people are grouping them together, that erodes the ability of the Nasi and the Av Beis Din to do what they need to. So Shmuel thought it's incredibly important that there are different forms of respect to each different office. So what did he do? So he instituted what we learned before. Right, that when the Nasi comes in, everyone stands up until the Nasi says to sit down. Av Beis Din comes in, they form two rows, and sit down. When he sits down, Talmid Chacham comes in. When he's in your Dalet Amos, you stand up. After he leaves your Dalet Amos, you sit down. So Rabbi Shmuel instituted this. Okay, there was only one problem. We'll say. Somebody says, therefore, good. I'm sorry. There was only one problem. When Rabbi Shmuel made this change, Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Nassan were not present in the base medrash, so they didn't hear about this. They didn't know about the change. Rabbi Gemara says, "Lamachar ki asu chazul kamei kamayu kidra gila milsa." So the next day, Rabbi Nassan and Rabbi Meir come into the base medrash, and they notice people aren't standing up for them the way that they did the previous day. Amri, my high. They said, what is this? Amruluhu, hachi takim Rabbi Shmuel. And he says, oh, Rabbi Shmuel made a change. He made a change. So it's here is the Rabbi Gamliel. So what happened? Obviously, Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Nassan got very offended. Why? Because they took it personally. They thought this was a personal affront. They thought Rabbi Gamliel for some reason was like just angry at them, didn't want to give them covet, and therefore switched everything, dafka when they weren't there. So what's their plan? Amr li Rabbi Meir Rabbi Nassan. Ana chacham va'ata bezin. So Rabbi Nassan, what's going on over here? I'm the tam chacham. You're the bezin. Naskin milsa kidli didan mayna avilei. Yisrael will say, so let's go ahead. So they say to each other, so Rabbi Nassan, let's make a plan so we should get back our honor. What should we do? My novid, nemalei gali uktsim delesle. Let's go ahead and ask Rabbi Shmuel Silber on the base medrash to give a shir on uktsim. Why? Because Rabbi Shmuel apparently was not proficient in uktsim. So let's go ask him to give a shir in something he's not proficient in, and people will see he's not such a great Talmid Chacham. He'll lose his position. You'll become the Av Beis Din, or the Nasi, and I'll become the Av Beis Din. This is their plan. This is their plan. So the Gemara says, "V'chevan delo gamer le, v'chevan delo gamer." Tzir Shmuel doesn't know uktzin. V'chevan delo gamer le, nemalei mi yamalo gvuras Hashem yashmiya kol tilaso. The mi na'al yamalo gvuras Hashem. Ultimately, again, to whom ultimately who should articulate the greatness of Hashem, which means who should receive kavod? Mi sheyachal lashmiya kol tilaso. Someone who knows how to say all the praises of God, meaning you have to know Kala Torah Kula to deserve all of the honor. And once we see that at the end of the day, Rabbi Shmuel doesn't know Kala Torah Kula, he's not going to get the honor. Navrei, we'll remove him from position. Ana Av Beis Din va'at Nasi. I'll become the Av Beis Din, and you will become the Nasi. Incredible. I will say, this was the plan. And I will say, what's the tragedy of this story? Why is all of this happening? The same way that most problems, interpersonal problems occur, which is a result of a lack of communication. Rabbi Shmuel never told this chevra what he was going to do, and he should have told them. Because at the end of the day, if you're going to make a change that affects other people, it's probably kedai to inform them about it so that they know about it on the front end. And they, unfortunately, automatically assumed the worst. They assumed that, right? Instead of them, Rabbi Shmuel will say, hey, what's going on with Rabbi Shmuel? We came in, people aren't standing up they used to, say he doesn't communicate with them, they don't communicate with him, and this potential blow-up is about to occur. So what happened? Shalmin Rabbi Yaakov ben Karshi, so Rabbi Yaakov heard about this plan, and he was worried that Rabbi Shmuel was going to be embarrassed. So what did he do? Azal Yasav Achori Elise Rabbi Shmuel, Pashat Garas Vitana, Garas Vitana. So Rabbi Yaakov has a very interesting idea. Now, for whatever the reason, Rabbi Yaakov also doesn't tell Rabbi Shmuel explicitly about the plan. Instead, what does he do? He perches himself outside of the window of Rabbi Shmuel's upper story, and he begins to learn uktzim out loud. He just begins to chazer over uktzim over and over and over. Amar, Rabbi Shmuel hears this. Mai dekama. What is going on over here? Dilma chasad shalom ikabe midrasha. So Rabbi Shmuel says that's really strange. Why is Rabbi Yaakov learning uktzin over and over outside of my window? Something's afoot, right? Something's going on. What does Rabbi Shmuel do? So the Gemara says, Yoav daite v'girsei. He put his mind to it, and ultimately, again, he learned it. So we'll say, it's not a point how incredible this is. Rabbi Shmuel learned all of uktzin in a day. Why was he able to learn all of uktzin in a day? Rabbi say, underline this line, Yahav daite. What does Yahav daite means? Literally translated, Yahav daite, he put his mind to it. When you put your mind to something, there is no telling what you could accomplish. And if we're honest with ourselves, more often than not, when we don't accomplish the things we want to accomplish in life, it's not because we couldn't, it's because we just weren't committed enough. We did not really put our mind to it. We weren't fully vested. So he puts his mind to it, and he learned all of uktzin. So the next day in the base medrash, Rabbi Meir Rabbi Nosson say to Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi, can you go ahead and give us a shir in uktzin? Pasach va'amar. Sure enough, Rabbi Shmuel gives a shir in uktzin. Incredible. Basar de Okim Amar Lahu. So after they finished, Rabbi Shmuel went over to them. Rabbi Meir Rabbi Nosson says, Ilo gaminhu kisisifun. Ultimately, again, had I not learned uktzin yesterday, you would have publicly embarrassed me. Rabbi Shmuel was saying, I know what you tried to do. So what did he do? Pakid v'avkinu be midrasha. He threw him out of the base medrash. Shmuel Gamliel throws out Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Nassan from the base medrash. So what happened? So the Gemara says, and I will say, by the way, you'll say it's so severe, and I will say you have to understand something. Where there's no midos, there's no Torah. Where there's no midos, there's no Torah. If this is how you treat another yid, if this was the setup you were upset about, so granted, if you were says, I'm sorry. I mean, he didn't say I'm sorry, but if he would have said, I'm sorry, I should have informed you, okay? I should have informed you. What are you doing? What are you doing? You're setting up the Nasi for public embarrassment. Why? Why? For your covet? For your ego? What's the pshat with this? So he throws him out of the base medrash. The Gemara says, so v'havakasi kushiyah sebepiska, v'shadilu hasam, davimifrak, delo havimifrak, kasi peruka v'shadilu. So this is what happened. Every day they would sit outside of the base medrash. They would write their questions on a little piece of paper, on a tablet, and they would put it, they would like throw it inside the base medrash. And then the answers would come back. Whatever they weren't answers for, Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Nassan would answer their own questions. Amar lehu Rabbi Yossi. So Rabbi Yossi says, doesn't make any sense. The Torah, these two great Talmidei Chacham are sitting outside and we're sitting inside. Amar lehu Rabbi Shmuel Gamliel. Nalinu. So Rabbi Shmuel Gamliel said, okay, you can bring them back in. However, mihu niknesinu delo nemru shmaisa mishmeyu. So we'll say, but Rabbi Shmuel Gamliel says we're going to penalize them, is that we will no longer say over rulings in their names. They can come back in, but we are not going to say rulings over in their names. Rabbi Meir's rulings are now going to be known as acherim. Others say, and Rabbi Nassan's rulings will be known as yesh omrim. Wow. So Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Nassan had a dream. And in the dream, they were told, go and reconcile Rabbi Gamliel. Rabbi Nassan went to reconcile. Rabbi Meir lo azal. Rabbi Meir did not reconcile. Amar divrei chalomos lo ma'alin v'lo moridin. Because Rabbi Meir said dreams are inconsequential. I will say, how tragic is this? That again, I will say, by the way, what an incredible Gemara leading up to Yom Noraim. Also, a reminder that part of our avodah as we prepare for Yom Noraim is not only to reconcile with God, but to reconcile with one another. And the truth is, you don't need a dream to tell you to reconcile with people whom you've wronged. Right? It's pashut, it's what we need to do, and it's the avodah. As difficult as it is what is incumbent upon each of us. So the Gemara goes weiter. The Gemara says, Akiyaz Rabbi Nassan, so Rabbi Nassan went to ask for forgiveness from Shmuel Gamliel. So he said, Shmuel Gamliel gave him Musar. He said, it's enough that your father's belt gave you the position of Av Beis Din. Do you think it would entitle you ultimately to Nasi? So apparently Rabbi Nassan's father was very influential. So that, I'm sure he earned the position ultimately, again, of Av Beis Din. Rabbi Shmuel gave him a little bit of Musar, like, who do you think you are to try to do what you did? Masni la Rabbi Shimon. So now we're fast forwarding a little bit, right? So that's the story. That's the story ultimately, again, of Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. Now, let's say we're fast forwarding a little bit to Rabbi Shimon Gamliel has a son by the name of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. Rabbi has a son who was named for his father, Rabbi Shimon. So there's grandfather Shimon Gamliel, grandson Shimon Gamliel. Now the Gemara follows a little bit. Rabbi is teaching his son. Rabbi is teaching his son, Rabbi Shimon, Achirim Omrim, Ilu Hayu Tmura, top of Yudalit, last half we'll say of Horayos, Ilu Hayu Tmura, Lahaya Kara. So we'll say, listen to this. So ultimately, again, now Rebbe is teaching his son, Reb Shimon, about halacha of Tmura. Now we're not going to get into the halacha now because we just don't have time, but ultimately he teaches it in the name of Achirim. It's Rabbi Meir. So young Reb Shimon says to his father, Rebbe, Amrlo mihem halalu shimei meim anu shosim ushmosim anamaskirim. Who are these people? We drink of their waters, but yet we don't know their names. In other words, who is Achirim? Who we're learning, who is that? In other words, the grandson didn't know the story. So So remember, Rebbe says to his son, Reb Shimon, Bnei Adam shebikshu lakar kavotcha ukavod beis avicha. These were people ultimately again who tried to uproot your kavod and the kavod of your father's household. In other words, these were people who tried to really harm our family. Amarlei, Gam avosam, gam sinasam, gam kinasam kvar avda. This is fascinating. So the son of Shimon, says to his father, Rebbe, but father, it's done. In other words, their love, their hatred, their animosity, it's all been lost. Why continue to penalize them if at the end of the day their actions they didn't have any impact? So it says, Amalei ha'oyev tamu charvos lanetzach. sometimes even when the enemy is gone, the sword is eternal. Also, which is really profound, sometimes the hurt that we visit upon other people, even though the action is done, everyone's moved on, sometimes the pain, sometimes the sword is there. This is incredible. This is the grandson. Rabbi Shimon is saying, but Father, that's true when bad people do things and what they did actually come to fruition. But when it doesn't come to fruition, sometimes you just gotta let things go and move on. This is incredible. I also want to point out, why was the grandson able to say this? Because I will say it makes sense. When you're in the thick of it, the interpersonal conflict, you cannot see the trees from the forest, right? You're just so convinced that you're right and everyone else is wrong that you can't see that what you're doing is actively detrimental. So what does it take? It takes someone outside of the conflict to say, hey, what are you doing? What are you doing? You want to be angry at the world for the rest of your life? You want to be angry at everyone who's supposed to be, who you love, who cares about you for the rest of your life? You could do that, but all you're doing is hurting yourself. It took the grandson, Reb Shimon, who was named for his grandfather, Shigam, to say, what are we doing? What are we doing? Rabbi Nasser Meir did try to do something terrible, but it didn't work. So we're going to penalize them forever. So they changed it. Hadra Asmile Amru Mishum Rabbi Meir. Ilohaya Tmur Lohaya Karav. Shabbos say they changed it. Instead of calling Rabbi Meir ultimately again Achirim, what they said was Mishum Rabbi Meir. They still wouldn't give direct attribution to Rabbi Meir Omer, but rather they changed it to Mishum Meir. And right, it was said in the name, all right, as it was said from Rabbi Meir. Amrav afilu Rabbi da'an venusa hava tana amru mishum Rabbi Meir. Even Rabbi, who was known for his incredible humility, would not state a ruling explicitly in the name of Rabbi Meir. Rather, again, he would say mishum Rabbi Meir. Amr Meir lo Amr Meir lo Amr. Amr Yochanan. First white line. Pligu bar b'Shimon Gamliel v'Rabbana. Incredible Gemara. That's how it ends. Chad Amar Sinai Adif. V'Chad Amar Oker Haram Harav. So we'll say, who is considered to be a greater scholar, a Sinai or an Oker Haram? What's your Sinai? A Sinai, like Har Sinai, represents someone who is a repository of knowledge, someone who has amassed a voluminous amount of knowledge. Oker Harim means someone who has ridiculous, analytical abilities, could take any issue and plumb to the depths of it, dissect it. Who is considered to be a greater scholar? And I will say, why does this matter? You'll say to yourself, who cares? What matters is, let's say you have to appoint a Rosh Yeshiva. What quality would you be looking for? So Rav Yosef Amar Sinai Rabba Rav Yosef Sinai Rabba Oker Haram. So the Gemara gives an example over here. Oh, did I skip? No, sorry. So we'll say the Gemara. I skip. Fine. Rav Yosef Sinai Rabba Oker Haram. So the Gemara gives an example. Rav Yosef was a Sinai. Rabba was Oker Haram. Shalchul Taman. So they sent these two rabbanim, right? Who's greater, Sinai or Karim? Shalchalahu, Sinai Adif. So they agreed a Sinai is better. The repository of information is better. Why? The Amar Mar Hakol Tzricha Lemari Chatya. So we'll say because everyone needs the wheat salesman. What does this mean? You could be as analytical as you want. If you don't have knowledge, you can't get anywhere. So therefore, Sinai is always considered to be a more valuable asset. So also as a result, so therefore they wanted to appoint Rav Yosef as the Rosh Yeshiva, because Rav Yosef was the Sinai, Rabba was the Oker Harim, but Rav Yosef refused to accept the position over Rabba. Malach Rabba Esron Atartin Shnin, Rabba became the Rosh Yeshiva for 22 years. V'hadar Malach Rav Yosef. Only after Rabba died did Rav Yosef accept the position of Rosh Yeshiva. The Chalshani de Malach Rabba, Rav Yosef ilo umna lebeis elochol. And all the days and all the years that Rabba was the Rosh Yeshiva, Rav Yosef would not accept any appearance of leadership. So apparently one of the benefits of being a leader is that you didn't have to go to the blood letter. The blood letter would come to you. Like concierge bloodletting. So the blood letter would come to you, right? So all those years, even though Rav Yosef could have had that, he did not accept that. He didn't want to give any appearance of leadership when Rabba was the leader. Rabbi V'Rava, Rabbi Zera, Rabbi Masna, Yossi, all these rabbanim were sitting together. And they needed a Rosh Yeshiva. Amar Koldom Milsav Lo Mifrach Laveresha. Whoever could say something without it getting refuted will become the Rosh Yeshiva. The Kulu Ifrach. Everyone advanced the halachic statement, and they were all refuted. Da Abaye Lo Ifrach. Abaye ultimately again his statement was not refuted. Chazye Rabba Abaye de Gabareshe. This is incredible. As soon as Abaye made a statement and it wasn't refuted, so listen to this. So Rava saw that literally Abaye's head got bigger. Now, what does this mean? This is not ego. This is not ego. He saw that Abaye changed. There was something about Abaye that changed. Amrle, Nachmani, Pasach, Ve'ema. So at that point, again, he said, Nachmani, which was Abaye, teach us. Now, listen, what does this mean? I think this is a tremendous yesod. A lot of times when we are faced with the opportunity to take on something communally, we become intimidated because we feel we're not going to be able to do it. We're not going to be able to do it just time-wise, can't do it because of resource-wise, they don't have the abilities. It is important to know, when a Yid takes on responsibility within community, when a Jew takes on responsibility within the Kehillah, within Klal Yisrael, within wherever it is, your shul, your community, you have siyata d'shmaya. The Ribono Shel Olam will never let you go at it alone when you are trying to help his children. If you're trying to do something for the Klal, you will always have divine providence. That's what it means. The moment that Abaye, the Chevra said, Abaye, you're the Rosh Yeshiva, Rava saw he changed. He became someone different. He didn't do anything yet. You're right. What was the change? The change was the blanket of siyata d'shmaya. The change was the blanket of divine providence that enveloped him as HaKadosh Baruch Hu was showing him, I believe in your ability to affect change within our community. Incredible. Ibailuhu, so the Gemara says, they asked, Ibailuhu Rabbi Zera Rabbi Masna Meheminayu Adif. Rabbi Zera Charpa Maksha. So again, the Gemara just, now after we went Sinai and Oker Harim, that obviously again a Sinai is greater than an Oker Harim. The Gemara asks another kasha. What about Ibailu Rabbi Zera Rabbi Masna? Heminayu Adif. Rabbi Zera Charpa Maksha. Rabbi Zera is sharp. Charif means he's sharp, again, which usually means sharp analytical skills, and is able to ask a lot of questions. Rabbi Masna, Rabbi Bar Rav Masna, Masun Umasik. Rabbi Masna is Masun means what? Measured, and is able to reach conclusions. So let's hear this. Which one is a greater midah? To be sharp and able to ask a lot of questions, or to be measured and ultimately again give answers? The Gemara says, "My teku." Ultimately, again, the Gemara leaves it as an open-ended question, not telling us in that case, ultimately, again, which one is considered to be the greater midah. Mazel tov. So much more to say on all of these Gemaras, so much many briefs. Mazel tov on Seder Nezikin. What an incredible, overwhelming accomplishment. If we had more time, we could get into this a little bit more. But suffice it to say, tomorrow, Bosai, we march towards the Beis HaMikdash. Tomorrow, in Mirz Hashem, we march in Kodshim. Tomorrow, in Mirz Hashem, we march to a brand new area of halacha, which will allow us to ignite the fire of Geula within our hearts and our souls, which will allow us to, once again, many of us, as a result of 2,000 years of diaspora, have fallen out of love with Karbanos. It is time to fall back in love, right? It is time to fall back in love, and in Mirz Hashem, that beautiful love story between us, the Beis HaMikdash, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Mirz Hashem, begins tomorrow. Shkach Bosai. Come on Zoom. Have a great day, everyone. Mazel tov, mazel tov.
Matt, this comment may have won you.
Oh, thank you.
Matt, comment may have won you too.
It went off. The top.
Oh.